Prevention-based tools leave you blind to threats inside your network. By adding network traffic analysis to your SOC, you can find and stop attackers before they make their move. ExtraHop provides complete visibility at enterprise scale. Detect threats 95% faster with machine learning that helps Tier 1 analysts perform like seasoned threat hunters. Visit extrahop.com/Security Weekly to learn why the SANS Institute calls ExtraHop fast and amazingly thorough. That's extrahop.com/Security Weekly. Networks are becoming increasingly complex and fragmented, and digital transformation and DevOps are driving an explosion in network connectivity changes. With each new network connection, cyber attackers may gain another opening to breach or traverse the network. At TwoFin, they've pioneered a policy-based approach to network security management using automation and analytics. As a result, you can make network changes in minutes instead of days, reliably and securely. To learn more about TwoFin, the security policy company, go to securityweekly.com/TwoFin and sign up for a free evaluation. By the end of 2020, 99% of exploited vulnerabilities will be publicly disclosed and known to IT system admins. The consequences of that fact means the burglar will already be in your house because you left the front door wide open by failing to patch known vulnerabilities. How can you keep the threat actors out? Through cloud-based automation, Automox enables you to slam the door on unpatched OS and third-party vulnerabilities across your entire Windows, Mac, and Linux infrastructure. Take advantage of a free trial with Automox to not only see the vulnerability status of your infrastructure, but do something about it within minutes. Start automating the fundamentals of cyber hygiene at securityweekly.com/Automox. That's securityweekly.com/Automox. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. Security Weekly is returning to Las Vegas this August for Black Hat and DEF CON. Do we want? Are we set on our Black Hat plans?
Yep,
are we ready
Black
to
Hat,
announce it?
Yeah.
So we
Black
decided.
Hat, will be in a suite in Mandalay Bay.
Yes.
So that one's easy. We're still working on DEF CON, but we're making progress on that one.
So Black Hat, we've looked at many different options. As many of you know, we've been in the pool area. We've been, where else have we been? In just regular on the show floor. You can rent like space on the floor or conference rooms, as you'll see them in the Black Hat expo areas. They're like, private rooms. Those were really expensive, and not being a security vendor, right, it's kind of hard to justify that cost. So our other option was, well, let's rent a suite. And so we decided to solidify that as the plan moving forward. And we're going to be recording for 2 or 3 days, like multiple tracks. So if you want a Black Hat interview, we've got some expanded coverage. We're actually, maybe not for the first time in a really long time, we're going to record actual shows at the conference. And we have sponsorship slots available, which is great because if everyone's there, it's going to come on the show. They can sit with us live in the suite and be there for a recorded episode, which I'm really excited about. I think it was there was a couple of, well, it was 2 things really. We need at least another host aside from me. And now that Matt's here and Matt's hosting the shows with me, we're like, okay, we have 2 Security Weekly hosts, check. And then it was the equipment. And so, using our hacking methods, we've cobbled together some equipment that will let us do, I say cobbled together, we bought brand new equipment and used some existing to make it so that we can record a show. So I'm really excited. We've got, a great space to do that. And, if you're out there in vendor land and want to do an interview or sponsor a show, please contact us and we'll be booking them soon. They're going at a pretty steady rate right now. But imagine they're going to get pretty full as the conference gets closer.
SecurityWeekly.com/booking.
/booking. Yeah, you can register for briefings, interviews, all that stuff. SecurityWeekly.com/booking. All right, Matt, enterprise news. Did you get a chance to read all 13 of these stories?
I did, crazy enough. Right after I did the webcast prep, which is right after the show. I did get through pretty much all these.
Sweet. Secureworks is launching a new cybersecurity analytics app. Secureworks has had some pretty good product announcements. Pretty steady pace, too.
Yeah, I thought this one was actually already out because I knew of this technology for a while, and it's really to centralize a lot of their threat intelligence data and build a service offering around what they call threat detection and response. I thought it was already out, so I guess I was a little forward in thinking. So this looks like the initial announcement of this new service.
Yeah, I mean, there is some value, I think, in comparing notes with other, companies' data anonymously. I think Automox had a great story around that, right? And what Jay was talking about was if other people are applying patches and having success or not, that's good data to have. I don't need to know who that company is. I just need to know how many companies applied this patch and what was the success rate. And I think we rely on our friends and email and Slack and reading on the web as to whether or not a patch is going to be reliable or not. But it's better, I think, to come from more trusted sources. Now, with threat intelligence data, I mean, it's not as concrete, I think, as patch data. Just because attackers went after one organization, what's to say they're going to come after mine in the same way? I mean, maybe. But I think you're better off observing what's in your own network first, then going out and saying, yeah, this is being seen, in the wild kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think what they're trying to do here is take their threat intelligence service that they offer, look across their customer base. If they see a threat at one customer, can they apply a countermeasure that would protect other organizations if it came into play in those organizations, right? So it's a similar concept. You're right. It's probably a little harder to do it in the threat domain than the patch domain. But if they've got a known indicator that they can create a countermeasure for and allow all their customers to leverage that countermeasure, that's a good thing for the entire customer base.
Looks like eSentire is partnering with Tenable for vulnerability management services, which, I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. I mean, this makes perfect sense. Tenable didn't have a lot of services themselves. When we were there, we tried to keep services pretty low from a revenue perspective. We were trying to build a product company.
Right.
So do you work with somebody like an eSentire that has managed detection response that can leverage the data from Tenable, both IO and Security Center, the SC product, use that as part of a broader endpoint detection and response service? Fantastic for both of them, I think.
Agreed. I think it's a good thing for many organizations to outsource that vulnerability management piece. Basically, you let someone else babysit the scanner so that you can focus on remediation.
Yeah, and on Tenable also expanded its relationship with ServiceNow, which is the second Tenable announcement this week. And that is just a tighter alignment with their new prioritization capability also being available into ServiceNow. As you know, Paul, we did a webcast with ServiceNow a couple weeks back. One of the use cases is around, better vulnerability management response. So now you take the prioritized data from Tenable, integrate that into ServiceNow's capabilities, which gives you a better idea of what to prioritize. You leverage that into their security operations component. So now you can help with the remediation of those vulnerabilities. Again, makes a lot of sense to bring those two companies and capabilities together.
Kaseya, one of our sponsors, has done an acquisition. And who did they acquire? ID Agent? ID Agent. Got it.
ID Agent.
And is that like an identity thing?
Say that again?
Is it like an identity thing, I would assume, or?
It is. We have a webcast coming up with them, I think, next week.
Yes, I believe so.
And part of that webcast is going to talk a little bit about some of their identity components. So Kaseya is a broad IT kind of management platform. That's kind of the way I view them, is more of a unified IT management that has been adding security capabilities into that unified IT management platform. Identity is one of those components. This acquisition obviously will enhance some of the security aspects around identity management that fits well into their broader portfolio.
BlackBerry has seen Cylance sales slow, according to the news. Kind of interesting. Is that buyer confidence, Matt, you think? Or, I mean, the market's always been flooded, and highly competitive.
Yeah, I mean, you've got 100 endpoint vendors out there, right? You've got Cylance being one of the big four that we usually talk about. I think this could come down to a couple things. One is BlackBerry wasn't known for security, right? BlackBerry really wanted to get into the security space. They acquire Cylance. Is there a brand challenge here? potentially,
Mm-hmm.
where now you've got Cylance embedded up under what was formerly a mobile company. There could be some disconnect with the brand. That could be part of it. But you also have a lot of competition in the endpoint space. Carbon Black is public. CrowdStrike wants to go public. So you've got other Tanium's rumored to want to go public sometime later this year. So you've got those other three biggies that are in the space, plus a lot of other endpoint solutions, and some are really, really good solutions. That's just putting pressure, I think, on the entire market. So this is going to stay a very competitive space, I think, and so anybody could potentially see something slowing on the endpoint side.
Yeah, it could also be with acquisitions too, as they readjust their marketing and sales and go-to-market strategy. Inevitably, they might take a dip until they can come up with more concrete, plans, because there's a huge transition depending on how the acquisition's done. Some do keep the momentum and keep them separate, right? And BlackBerry may have tried to, I think, integrate them, and brand confusion is certainly on the table as well.
Yeah, I mean, brand confusion is part of it, but then what is the longer term strategy? What does BlackBerry now want to do with Cylance, and how are they going to go and continue to drive longer term strategy? That's the other thing I think they ultimately have to educate customers and the market on, so people understand how Cylance fits into the bigger part of the strategy.
Mm-hmm. Proofpoint has acquired Meta Networks for $120 million.
Yeah, this was it's a pretty big announcement. I pulled up the Owler on Meta Networks because I was curious, how much money had they taken, so it looks like total funding was $5.7 million, $120 million acquisition in the space. So from a return perspective, this looks like a really good return for the Meta Networks folks. They are Israeli based. We know there's a lot of great technology coming out of Israel. This is their network as a service capability, which was interesting because it's the way they describe it is it's user centric. And you and I have talked about this challenge I see coming, where the perimeter is now shifting to aspects of the user and the application. And I was actually last week having some conversations with a couple CISOs, and they said, we don't even care about the application anymore. To us, it's all about the user, right? So how does this user-centric network capability now fit into the rest of the portfolio to help that continual shifting perimeter? So I think it's an interesting acquisition. They talk about integrating into the CASBs.
Mm-hmm.
You guys know my kind of stance on the CASBs, but if you can make CASBs a little more user-centric and not network-centric, where you can get some distribution when you're outside the perimeter, that may be where they're going, and that might be a really good thing.
Shape Security is helping with the password spraying problem, which is kind of interesting. I think that is a pretty big problem. Interesting that they're pivoting into that arena.
Yeah, they did some of this on the enterprise side. This announcement is more about moving this down to the SMBs in a little more as a service offering. I think they've had some really interesting technologies that have been deployed in the enterprise to help with this. But what they basically created was a reverse proxy solution for SMBs that can't manage maybe this technology themselves or on premise. It's really a reverse proxy capability here that embeds CDN, DDoS, and some advanced attack protection, and you kind of redirect folks through this proxy, and then either sends back cached information or allows, if they don't see anything malicious, all the way through to your web server. So it's a really interesting approach here, really trying to streamline these capabilities that the enterprises have used into an SMB kind of as a service offering.
StackRox is Red Hat container certified now on their Kubernetes security platform.
Yeah, so this has been a shift with StackRox for almost not quite a year now, and so they've been moving more onto more of the static side. I think they still have some runtime stuff. What I can't tell from this article is how are they deploying? Is this a privileged container on Red Hat OpenShift, or have they changed some of their underlying technologies to make this better? Obviously, by being certified in Red Hat, it allows you to easily deploy into the OpenShift environment,
Mm-hmm.
which makes it really easy for adoption. I still have some questions on how it works and the approach and whether this is the right way to do it or not. But this has been a continual shift of StackRox, like I said, just under the last year or so, of moving more into the static side to compete with people like Aqua Security,
Mm-hmm.
Twistlock, et cetera. And then, get a little more adoption and then maybe go back to some of the runtime stuff.
Yeah. And I think largely the container security sub-industry is moving away from privileged containers as more cloud adoption, cloud services are able to be set up to host your containers. You don't want a privileged container anyhow, regardless of where you can do that in the cloud, obviously. Hooking the kernel's out of the question. So I think, Matt, in the briefings that I'm doing, a lot of people are, Aqua's one, right? They can deploy as like a micro agent on the containers. You don't have to hook the kernel. You don't have to have a privileged container. Those are still there. But that seems to be where the space is going. And they're all the vendors are marching towards serverless as well as that gains adoption.
Yeah, which will get us to Espagon in a second. But on that point, Paul, the challenge is when you start to deploy cloud and you start to use container and orchestration as a service, and those underlying hosts aren't there to do the kernel plugin and or allow running in a privileged containers, there has to be a different approach. That's what Espagon has announced in going after the serverless market. Now, their original focus was AWS Lambda. And so I'm like, okay, how do they do this? Because you can't, again, no privileged containers, no kernels, no agents. It looks like it's a software library that gets added in. So if you scroll down to their webpage, it looks like they have libraries for different languages that you can include into your code. Node.js, Python, Go, and Java appear to be the ones that are supported today. So think about this as a software library that gets included into your source code set that now gives you some protections. How it works after that, not quite sure, but that looks like the deployment model here.
And I like that deployment model as long as my containers are still somewhat lean, right? Adding in software libraries or executable code into a container, it'll sound like an agent, and that might turn you off, but don't let it, because the way containers are built, you just pick and choose which packages or libraries are included with it, and you're off to the races. And I don't think it impacts as much as you would think of a traditional agent on a desktop or server.
Yeah, and we've seen this. I've seen this approach a couple other places. I think this is what Trend was doing when they announced their container support. It was more of a software library include. The only challenge I see with software library includes is you've got to convince the developers that your code is good and secure and trusted before developers are going to allow that include to happen. And so the only reason I say that is there is potentially a little bit of a friction with the development and the DevOps teams until there's enough trust built up in order to allow that adoption of those software library includes.
The build process is getting easier to automate, and while we do have a lot of tools to do that, I don't think that developers are worried today, if they're doing DevOps and or Agile, about more work, right? If you want to include various components, right? I think it all speaks to efficiency. I think what they're worried about is reliability and stability of their applications and what's going to impact that. And to be honest, I can't blame them, right? I'm too concerned. I too am concerned about that as well when I deploy containers stability-wise. You don't want it to be impacted.
And trusting the supply chain. Right, we've seen this with, we've covered how many WordPress plugin issues on this show.
Jenkins was just the most recent one. A researcher did a study of 100 Jenkins plugins, or plugins in general, found like 100 that were vulnerable. And it just comes down to, I was talking to, I think it was Marcin from SecFence, about this particular problem. It's just so easy to leave out a control because it breaks something, right? And so I still think we've got a lot of work to build these DevOps pipelines correctly and securely. There's just a lot of complexity, a lot of tools. I say there's complexity because I'm not a full-time developer and I, mess with it. But I think we've got a lot of maturity to do to make sure we configure the pipeline correctly, that all the tools are configured correctly, and that security is inside of all of those various components.
Yeah, one of the big concerns that came out of the Global Cyber Innovation Summit last week in Baltimore from the CISOs was the supply chain from an open source perspective and other components, because what's preventing a malicious committer into an open source project that's now being used by your company to build their key application on top of, right? So anytime software's in the mix, I think there are going to be some trust issues that have to be resolved, and there has to be a better way to supply aspects of that supply chain so that we don't have malicious code and or backdoors put into some of this code. And it was a big part of the topic. A couple of the panels last week is, people are worried about this kind of stuff.
Let's see. Exabeam has raised $75 million.
Yeah. Now, so this one's a little interesting to me because in the article, so I think they're at $190 million now total. That's not crazy per se. I mean, yeah,
sure,
we could talk tenable numbers at some point. But what was most interesting to me is this is less than a year after announcing a $50 million Series D round.
Wow.
So they raised $50 million. In less than a year, they're raising another 75. I'd be a little concerned, personally, because it's like, wait a minute.
What'd you do with that first $50 million?
Yeah, what'd you do with the last $50 million in less than a year? Now, a lot of organizations take on capital to continue to scale, and having running a business and having run a couple businesses in the past, right? Humans are expensive. And so when you start to scale up a team, whether it's on the R&D side, whether it's on the sales side, you start to burn a lot of capital fast. And this is probably a scale out component where they took the money, they scaled out, but they need more money to continue that momentum. I just don't like to see raises this close because it to me, it's an instant flag of they're burning too much cash. And they're not offsetting that with revenue as they scale. I would like to see these more 18 to 24 months out if I'm thinking about an investment perspective. So, I mean, I'm a little concerned. It was less than a year.
I think that was it for stories. I think we talked about all of them. There was a privilege access management. Solutions are shifting to the cloud. It was a survey. But with that, I want to take a short break and come back to give our listeners an update on some of our security industry briefings. Stay tuned.